The sun of Orion 9 hung large and pale in the sky, spreading a soft yellow light over the desert plain. Thomas walked slowly across the cracked ground, his boots leaving faint marks on the dusty surface. He carried a small scanner in his right hand, its screen glowing faint green as it searched for metal traces under the soil. His ship, the Kestrel, was parked a few kilometers behind him, half hidden among low rocks. Thomas had been living alone on this world for nearly 3 months. He was a survey engineer, sent by the Human Expansion Corps to study the mineral layers of new planets. Most days were quiet. He would wake before sunrise, check the air filters, eat a simple meal, and then go out with his tools. He had learned to enjoy the silence. There were no crowds, no noise, and no endless reports from headquarters, only the sound of the wind and the steady hum of his scanner. But this morning felt different. The wind was softer, almost whispering through the rocks. A flock of thin-winged birds circled in the distance, their bodies catching the sunlight like glass. Thomas paused to take a photo with his wrist camera. He smiled a little. It was small moments like these that reminded him why he liked exploration. Every new planet felt like a secret waiting to be told. He walked farther until the ground began to slope down. At the base of the slope, a long scar marked the land as if something had crashed there. The scanner beeped suddenly. The screen flashed a red signal showing metal fragments under the sand. Thomas frowned. There were no reports of ships or drones operating near this area. Curious, he adjusted his backpack and followed the trail. As he moved closer, he saw pieces of what looked like silver glass half buried in the dirt. He crouched and picked one up. It was thin, light, and warm to the touch. Not human material. When he turned it, faint blue light rippled across its surface. He placed it carefully in his sample bag and looked around. Then he noticed something at the edge of a rock formation. A small shape lying still on the ground. At first he thought it was a broken drone. The body was small, covered with pale fabric that shimmered under the sun. But then he saw the shape of a hand, delicate and narrow, fingers curled slightly as if clutching the dust. Thomas's heart started beating faster. He ran forward and knelt beside the figure. It was a girl, not human, but close enough that he could read her fear and weakness even in sleep. Her skin was smooth and faintly luminous, almost silver, and her hair was fine like threads of soft light. She looked young, maybe the size of a human teenager. Around her neck hung a small crystal pendant that flickered weakly. He checked for breathing. Her chest rose and fell very slowly. She was alive but weak. There was a shallow cut on her shoulder, and her clothing was torn on one side. Thomas pulled his water flask from his belt and poured a few drops onto her lips. She stirred faintly and made a low sound, a tone like a quiet melody. Thomas spoke gently. "Can you hear me?" The girl opened her eyes. They were wide and bright with no visible pupils glowing softly like the reflection of the sky. She tried to sit up but failed. Thomas supported her carefully and said, "It's all right, I won't hurt you." She didn't understand the words, but she looked at him with an expression that mixed confusion and trust. When he reached out, she didn't pull away. Thomas scanned her with his wrist device. The results made little sense. Her body temperature was lower than a human's and her oxygen intake was slower, but she was definitely organic. He looked around again. No sign of a ship, no smoke, nothing that explained the crash. He thought for a moment. Leaving her here was impossible. Night on Orion 9 could be freezing, and the air grew thin after sunset. He placed the scanner back into his bag and lifted her carefully in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, as if her body was made partly of air. The walk back to the Kestrel was slow. The girl rested quietly, her head against his shoulder. A few times she tried to speak, but the sounds were soft and melodic, impossible for him to understand. Thomas simply said, "You're safe. I'll help you," repeating the words as if they were a promise. When he reached the ship, he opened the main hatch and carried her inside. The small cabin smelled faintly of metal and recycled air. He laid her on a cot near the medical station and turned on the ship's atmosphere regulator. Then he fetched a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. He began cleaning the wound on her arm with antiseptic foam. She winced slightly, then watched his movements carefully. Thomas smiled and said, "Almost done." When he finished, he gave her another sip of water. She drank it slowly, eyes never leaving his face. For the next hour, Thomas moved between the medical console and the control desk, trying to analyze the fragment he had found near the crash site. The computer recognized some of its molecular patterns but could not match them to any known material. It was not from any registered alien group known to the Corps. That meant he might have found a species unknown to human records. He turned to look at her again. She was sitting now, touching the pendant at her neck. When she noticed him watching, she pointed at herself and said softly, "Leary." He blinked. "Leary?" She nodded slowly. "Leary," Thomas smiled. "All right, Leary." She seemed to understand that he had accepted the name, and her expression brightened a little. She pointed at him questioningly. "Thomas," he said, tapping his chest. She repeated it, her voice light and musical. "Thomas." For a while they simply exchanged gestures and names. It was strange but peaceful. She pointed at various tools in the room, asking what they were. He showed her a scanner, a wrench, a piece of ore. She examined each one with curiosity, eyes widening as if every object told her something new. Later that evening, as the light outside turned orange, Thomas warmed a small meal pack and offered half to her. She accepted it carefully, sniffing it first before tasting. Her face softened, and she gave a small nod, perhaps to say it was good. They ate together in silence, two strangers sharing food on an empty planet. When night fell, Thomas set up a gentle light in the cabin. He watched the stars through the small window above the console. The twin moons of Orion 9 rose together, washing the desert in pale blue light. Leary sat beside him, her pendant now glowing a steady soft hue. He turned to her. "Do you understand me at all?" he asked quietly. She tilted her head, then touched the window and pointed at the stars. "Home," she said. Thomas followed her gesture. "Your home?" She nodded, eyes distant. For a moment he imagined a world of shining rivers and silver forests, a place far from human noise and machines. He felt a small ache of respect and wonder. Before sleeping, Thomas checked her wound again. It was healing faster than expected. Her body seemed to adjust easily to his ship's air mix. He made a note of that in his log, but didn't send any report yet. He wasn't sure what the Corps would do if they knew about her. He didn't want them to treat her as an experiment. That night he lay awake for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the ship. Across the small cabin, Leary slept peacefully. The light from her pendant shimmered faintly, casting slow-moving reflections on the metal walls. Thomas thought about how strange the universe could be. One day of routine work, and now he was sharing his ship with a being from a race no one had met before. He wondered what had caused her crash and whether anyone would come looking for her. The desert outside stretched endlessly. It was hard to imagine others out there, but he had a feeling the silence would not last. He turned on the internal recorder and spoke softly. "Day 79 on Orion 9. Found unknown lifeform, humanoid female, injured but recovering. She calls herself Leary. Communication limited but friendly. I'll continue to observe and assist until I understand more." He stopped the recording and looked toward her again. She was sleeping with a faint smile, her hand resting on the edge of the cot. Something about her calmness eased his mind. Thomas closed his eyes and let the hum of the kestrel fill the silence. Outside, the twin moons moved higher, and the wind swept gently over the rocks, carrying a sound that almost seemed like distant singing. By the time he drifted into sleep, Thomas did not know that far beyond the desert ridges, under the shadow of the eastern cliffs, other lights were already stirring, lights that belonged to those searching for the girl named Leary. Morning came softly over the desert of Orion 9. The sunlight slid through thin clouds, painting the sand with shades of gold and pale red. Inside the small ship, Thomas woke to the faint sound of humming. It was not the hum of engines. It was a voice, light and musical. He turned his head and saw Leary sitting by the window. Her pendant shone with soft white light. She was looking outside, watching the rising sun as if it was something she had missed deeply. The sound she made was calm and filled the cabin with a strange peace. Thomas sat up and rubbed his eyes. "Good morning," he said quietly. Leary turned and smiled. "Morning," she repeated. He was surprised. It was the first word she had spoken that matched his language. It came out a bit slow, but it was clear. She pointed to the sunlight, then to herself. "Warm," she said. Thomas smiled. "Yes, warm." Over the next few hours, Thomas showed her how to use simple things in the ship, how to open the water panel, how to warm food, how to turn on the lights. She watched everything closely and learned fast. Her movements were smooth and careful, almost like a dancer's. When she didn't understand something, she would tilt her head slightly and wait for him to show her again. Thomas tried to learn from her too. He pointed at objects and waited for her to name them in her own language. Some words were soft and flowing, made of short sounds and gentle tones. He could not pronounce them well, but she laughed kindly each time he tried. Later that morning, he decided to step outside for a while to check the scanner. The air was clear and the temperature mild. Leary followed him out, her eyes wide with wonder as she looked across the desert. She touched the sand with her fingers, letting it slip slowly through her hand. Soft, she said, testing the English word. Thomas nodded. Yes, soft sand. They walked together toward a line of rocks. The air shimmered slightly and small crystal insects flew near the ground. Thomas collected a few samples while Leary knelt beside a patch of glowing moss. When she touched it, the light brightened as if responding to her. Thomas watched quietly. There was something different about her connection to this world. The planet seemed to know her. When they returned to the ship, Leary pointed to the horizon. She drew a circle in the air and then placed her hand over her heart. Thomas guessed she was trying to say that her home was far away. Your people? He asked. She nodded and then traced another sign in the air, a wave-like motion that ended in a small spiral. He had seen similar symbols in some of the carvings found during earlier surveys of other planets. Maybe her people had been living on Orion 9 for a long time, unknown to humans. The next day, Thomas worked on repairing a broken antenna on top of the ship. The sandstorm from 2 nights ago had damaged it, and he wanted to restore the long-range signal. Leary stayed near him, holding tools and passing them whenever he asked. Even though she didn't fully understand his words, she always seemed to know what he needed. At one point, while tightening a joint, Thomas looked down and saw her face lifted toward the sky. Her eyes reflected the clouds, and for a moment, it seemed like she was listening to something far away. He asked softly, "Are you hearing something?" She looked at him, then pointed upward. "Call," she said. Thomas frowned. "Someone is calling you?" She nodded. Far. He didn't know what to say. Maybe she meant a memory or maybe a real signal. Either way, he knew she missed her people. That evening, they sat outside the ship again. The air was cool and the 2 moons had risen early. Thomas lit a small portable lamp beside them. Leary brought out a few stones she had collected and arranged them in a circle. She began to hum again, and the stones started to glow faintly, each one shining with a color of its own. Thomas watched in quiet awe. "You can do that?" Leary smiled gently and nodded. "Life," she said, pointing to the stones, then to the ground, and finally to the sky. He understood a little. For her people, maybe everything was alive, and the rocks, the air, the stars. When she finished, she gave him one of the stones. It pulsed softly in his palm, warm and light. "For you," she said. Thomas thanked her, touched by the gesture. "It's beautiful." The next morning, while he was scanning the metal fragment he had found near her crash site, the computer detected faint energy traces, similar to her pendant's light. It meant that her ship or vehicle had not been destroyed by fire or impact. It had simply lost power and fallen. That suggested it was built with technology different from human designs. Thomas showed her the fragment. "Your ship?" he asked. Leary touched it, and the faint blue lines across its surface lit up again. She nodded slowly. "Mine," she said. Her face grew sad, and she lowered her hand. He placed the fragment on the table gently. "We can try to fix it," he offered. "Maybe then we can send a message." She looked up with hope in her eyes, then smiled. "Together," she said. The following hours passed in quiet work. Thomas opened the small repair bay, and Leary helped him reconnect wires and clean components. She was precise and graceful, often guiding his hand toward the correct connector without needing to speak. Her touch seemed to energize some of the materials. The faint blue lights on the fragment glowed brighter whenever she was near. By the time night came, they had repaired one part of the system. Thomas connected it to the ship's power grid to test it. For a moment, the cabin filled with soft, shifting lights. Strange patterns appeared on the screen like moving stars. Then a tone echoed through the ship, a sound like a heartbeat, slow and calm. Leary stepped closer, eyes wide. "Home," she whispered. Thomas stared at the display. "You did it," he said quietly. "You sent a signal." She shook her head. "No send, call." He realized she meant that the signal was coming from outside, not from the device. Someone was reaching out to her. They both stood still as the tone faded. Thomas checked the sensors, but the signal vanished too quickly to trace. "Maybe it was your people," he said. Leary placed her hand over her heart again and nodded. "They come," she said softly. That night Thomas couldn't sleep easily. The idea that others like Leary might be coming made him both curious and uncertain. He didn't know if they would see him as a friend or as a stranger who had taken one of their own. He looked over at Leary, who was resting peacefully. Her pendant now glowed brighter than before. He stepped outside for a while to clear his thoughts. The air was cool, and a gentle wind carried the scent of the dry land. Above him the stars shone brighter than on any human world. He looked at them and thought about how large the galaxy truly was. Humans had come far, but they still knew so little. Meeting Leary had reminded him of that. When he returned to the cabin, Leary was awake again. She was sitting on the floor, tracing patterns with her fingers that glowed faintly for a moment before fading. He sat beside her quietly. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked up at him and nodded. "Yes," she said. Then she added a few words in her own language, slow and careful. Though he didn't understand the meaning, her tone was soft, filled with calm. He smiled. "I hope that means thank you," she smiled back. "Thank you," she repeated, this time in English. Thomas felt a quiet warmth inside. The bond between them had grown quickly, shaped by trust and simple kindness. He knew the coming days might change everything, but for now, he was content with the silence they shared. The next morning, when the first light touched the desert again, Thomas was outside checking the sky scanner. He noticed a faint reading, something large moving beyond the ridge far to the east. The reading disappeared after a moment, but it left a trace of energy similar to Leary's pendant. He turned to look at her standing near the door of the ship. She seemed to sense it too. Her pendant flickered faster and her eyes filled with quiet hope. "They come," she said again, voice soft but certain. Thomas didn't answer. He looked toward the horizon where the desert stretched endless and calm. Somewhere beyond those hills, something was approaching. He had saved Leary's life, and in doing so he had changed both of theirs. What he didn't know was that saving one girl would soon bring him face to face with a whole tribe, and a choice that would test what it truly meant to be human. The sky above Orion 9 was calm at first light. The air carried a faint chill that touched the sand and left thin waves of mist along the horizon. Thomas stepped out of the ship to begin his usual morning check. The silence felt heavier than usual, as if the desert was holding its breath. Leary was already outside, standing on a rock near the edge of the ridge. Her pendant glowed with a steady rhythm, brighter than ever before. She was facing east, her hair moving gently with the wind. Thomas walked toward her and asked, "You sense them again, don't you?" She nodded without turning. "They close." He looked out across the desert but saw only empty sand and distant rock pillars. The scanner on his wrist showed faint energy signals, but they were strange and irregular, as if something was hiding behind layers of air distortion. Thomas said carefully, "If your people are coming, they might not know who I am. They could be afraid." Leary turned and met his eyes. "No fear. You good?" Her voice was calm, but Thomas still felt uneasy. He was proud of what they had shared during the past few days. Yet he knew how first contact stories often went. Misunderstanding could destroy trust faster than anything. He decided to stay near the ship and let them approach first. By midday, the light grew harsh. The sand reflected the sun like gold dust. Thomas sat outside with Leary under the shade of a fabric canopy. They shared a quiet meal, small portions of dried fruit and water. Every few minutes, Leary looked toward the east. Her pendant shimmered faster each time. When the wind shifted, Thomas noticed something in the distance. It looked like moving shadows across the sand. At first he thought it was heat haze, but then he realized the shapes were real. They were figures, tall and graceful, walking in a wide formation. Their steps were light, leaving barely any mark behind. "Leary," he said softly. She stood up at once, her eyes bright with emotion. She pressed her hand to her pendant and it flared with light. The figures stopped for a moment as if responding to her signal. Then they continued forward. Thomas's heart pounded. He wanted to retreat inside the ship but forced himself to stay calm. He knew running would only make things worse. He lowered his tools and kept his hands open at his sides to show he meant no harm. As the group came closer, Thomas could see them more clearly. They were similar to Leary, slender, luminous-skinned and dressed in woven garments that shimmered with faint colors. The air around them seemed to bend slightly, giving them a quiet glow. At the front walked a tall woman with hair that moved like liquid silver. Her eyes held the same calm light as Leary's, but deeper, older. Leary ran forward a few steps and called out in her language, her voice bright and filled with emotion. The tall woman answered with a soft, melodic phrase. They met halfway and embraced, their pendants glowing together in one bright pulse. Thomas stayed where he was, unsure whether to move. He watched the reunion silently, feeling a strange mix of joy and nervousness. After a moment, Leary turned and pointed toward him. The tall woman followed her gesture, her gaze falling on Tomas. She said something to the others, and the entire group stopped. The air grew still again. Thomas swallowed hard. He tried to keep his voice steady. I mean no harm. I helped your daughter. He wasn't sure if they could understand him, but the tall woman stepped closer. Her movements were calm and graceful. She stopped a few meters away, looking at him with unreadable eyes. Then from the side of her neck, a small device shimmered to life. A soft tone came from it, followed by words in clear, gentle English. You are Tomas. Tomas blinked, surprised. Yes, that's right. The woman tilted her head slightly. You found my child and gave her life again. He nodded slowly. She was hurt. I couldn't leave her there. The translator repeated his words with a delay, and the woman listened carefully. Then she said, We are the Thalen. We live under the cliffs beyond the horizon. Leary is of our tribe. Her eyes softened slightly. You cared for her with kindness. For that, I thank you. Leary stood beside her mother now, smiling proudly. She said something in her own language, and the woman placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Thomas felt a wave of relief. He hadn't been sure how they would react, but they seemed peaceful, not angry or fearful. He said, I didn't know anyone else lived here. My mission was to study the minerals in this region. The woman nodded. Your kind has walked our skies before, but none came to this land. You are the first to meet us face to face. She looked around at the ship, then back at him. Humans are builders. We have watched your machines from afar. Thomas hesitated, unsure how to respond. We explore because we are curious. We want to understand. That is good, she said, but understanding begins with respect. Her tone was calm but carried quiet strength. Thomas nodded. I agree. Leary stepped closer and reached for Thomas's hand. Her mother watched the gesture without disapproval. The woman spoke again. You gave care without knowing who she was. You treated her as you would one of your own. That is rare between different worlds. She turned to one of the others in her group and received a small object, a stone that glowed faintly with blue light. She held it out to Tomas. This is a sign of peace between our people. Keep it, and you will always be welcome among the Thalen. Thomas accepted the stone carefully. It was warm and light, the same kind of energy as Leary's pendant. Thank you, he said sincerely. I'm honored. The translator repeated his words, and the woman smiled slightly. You are honest, Thomas of Earth. After a moment of silence, Leary's mother turned to her people and gave a short signal. They began to set up a small camp nearby, arranging circular tents made of thin, bright fabric that shimmered in the sunlight. It all happened quickly and quietly, each person moving with practiced grace. Leary stayed near Thomas, showing him what they were doing. She explained simple words, home, light, food, pointing to each as she spoke. Thomas repeated them, and she laughed softly each time his pronunciation was close. As evening approached, the Thalen lit soft lanterns that floated a few feet above the ground. The air around the camp filled with gentle light. Tomas sat with them, sharing a simple meal of fruits and grains. Their food had a cool, sweet taste and left a feeling of calm in his chest. Leary's mother, whose name was Sira, sat across from him. She studied him quietly before asking, Why did you stay with her? You could have called your own people. Tomas thought for a moment before answering. Because she needed help. I didn't think about who she was or where she came from. I just saw someone in danger. Sira nodded slowly. Then you understand more than many. She looked toward Leary, who was laughing softly with some of the younger Thalen. My daughter is brave but curious. She often wanders beyond our safe paths. The storm caught her off guard. We feared we had lost her, Thomas said quietly. She's strong. She learned quickly. Yes, Sira said with pride. She carries the light of our ancestors. Night fell and the desert became cool. The Thalen sang low songs that flowed like water, filling the air with peace. Tomas listened, feeling the sound move through him like a heartbeat. Sira spoke again, her voice softer. You will return to your people soon, but I ask that you remember this place not as strange, but as shared. I will, Thomas said. And maybe one day humans and Thalen can learn from each other. That is a good wish, she replied. Perhaps the stars will agree. Later, when most of the tribe had gone to rest, Thomas and Leary sat near the edge of the camp. The lanterns above them drifted slowly in the wind. You happy now? He asked. Leary nodded. Yes, you stay. He hesitated. For now, yes. I'll stay. She smiled, and her pendant glowed gently. Good, friend. He looked at the desert stretching endlessly under the twin moons. The stars shimmered like quiet fires. He felt something new inside him. Not just wonder, but belonging. Thomas had come to Orion 9 as a worker, a man looking for rocks and numbers. Now he found something far greater. In saving one life, he had opened a path between two worlds. But he did not know that this was only the beginning. For far beyond the horizon, a new message from Human Command had already been sent toward his ship. Others were coming, and soon Thomas would have to choose between the orders of his own kind and the peace he had built here among the Thalen. The morning light over Orion 9 carried a strange stillness. The desert looked calm, but Thomas could sense a quiet tension under the surface. For 2 days he had lived among the Thalen tribe, learning their customs and their songs. Every evening they lit soft lanterns that floated on warm air and filled the night with color. Leary had been happy, and her mother Syra had shown Thomas many parts of their culture. The Thalen believed that every living thing had a light within it. They did not take more from the land than they gave back. Thomas admired that deeply. But now, standing near the edge of the ridge, he felt a heavy weight pressing on him. His wrist communicator had begun flashing again. It was a signal from his base station. The message was short and clear. Unidentified alien life signs detected near your coordinates. Prepare for contact. Reinforcements arriving. Thomas read it 3 times. The words filled him with worry. The Corps must have traced his earlier scans and found the strange energy readings. They were coming here, and they would not arrive with gentle curiosity. They would come to secure the area, gather samples, and question everything. He turned to look at the Thalen camp. They were unaware of the message. Children were playing near a pool of clear water. Leary was helping a group weave light fabric. The sight made his heart ache. He walked toward Sira, who was standing near the lantern stones. Her calm eyes turned to him as he approached. You look troubled, she said softly. He hesitated. My people are coming. They know you are here. Her face grew thoughtful. Will they come with open hands or with fear? Thomas could not answer at first. They will come with questions. They will want to study everything. They may not understand your ways. Sira looked toward the horizon. Fear is born from not knowing. Perhaps they will learn. Thomas wished he could believe that, but he had seen enough of human exploration to know it was not always peaceful. Still, he promised himself he would try to protect them. That night, the sky glowed faintly red in the far distance. Thomas knew it was the exhaust trail of incoming shuttles. The Corps was landing on the western plain. He spent most of the night with Leary, helping her and her friends secure their glowing stones and pack their tents. Are you leaving? He asked quietly. Leary shook her head. Home safe under the cliffs. We go there. Good, Thomas said. Stay hidden until I speak with my people. She looked at him with worry. You come too? He paused. I will follow. I need to make them understand first. Leary took his hand. Promise. I promise, he said. When dawn broke, the air was heavy with the sound of distant engines. A silver ship crossed the horizon, moving low. It slowed above the desert, its thrusters stirring clouds of sand. Thomas raised his hand to shield his eyes. He saw the Corps insignia on the hull. The Thalen moved quietly back toward the cliffs, their forms fading into the shimmer of the air. Only Sira and Leary remained near him. Sira placed a hand on his arm. You carry our light now. Speak with truth. Thomas nodded. I will. As the ship landed, a ramp opened and 3 armored figures stepped out. Their suits reflected the sunlight, and their helmets hid their faces. The leader raised a hand in greeting. Thomas Rayner, engineer class, the voice said through the helmet speaker. We received your coordinates. Are you alone? Thomas took a steady breath. I'm not alone. The beings you detected are intelligent. They call themselves the Thalen. They are peaceful. The officer paused. So the readings were correct. You made first contact without clearance. Yes, Tomas said firmly. But they're not a threat. I've been living with them. They have families and homes. You can't treat them like test subjects. Another officer stepped forward, scanning the area. Show us where they are. Thomas shook his head. No, not until you promise safety. The lead officer lowered the scanner. Orders are to establish control of the site and secure all unknown life. You know the protocol. Thomas's voice grew firm. I know the protocol, but it's wrong here. They saved my life too in their way. They trust me. There was a short silence. The wind carried sand across the open plain. The officers looked at each other through their mirrored helmets. Finally, the leader said, Headquarters will decide. We're setting up camp. Stay close, Engineer Rayner. Thomas watched as they began unloading equipment. Tall antennae and shield modules rose from the ground, spreading blue light around the area. It looked like a barrier. His heart sank. He turned toward the cliffs. In the far distance, he could see faint glows from Thalen lanterns. He knew they were watching. That evening, as the human camp grew larger, Thomas slipped away to the ridge. Leary was waiting there, hidden among the rocks. She looked worried. They bring walls, she said softly. Yes, Thomas said. They think they're protecting themselves. From us, he sighed. They don't understand yet. She touched her pendant and it glowed brighter. I show them. I show light. Thomas caught her arm gently. Wait, if you go there now, they might panic. Please let me speak first. She hesitated, then nodded. I trust you. He went back to the camp and requested a direct call to Commander Leon on the orbiting ship. When her voice came through, it sounded sharp and clear. Tomas, your report is incomplete. Send full biological samples and location data. I can't do that, Commander, he said. They're people. They have a culture. We can't just take samples. There was silence for a few seconds. Then Leon said, Our mission is to ensure safety and gather knowledge. Do not forget your duty. I haven't forgotten, Thomas replied. But maybe our duty should start with respect. The line went quiet again. Finally, the commander said coldly, Stay where you are. We'll handle this. The signal ended. Thomas knew then that time was short. The Corps would soon send more units to the surface. He walked out of the camp again, into the night. The stars above were bright and cold. At the base of the cliffs, Sira and several Thalen elders waited. Their lanterns formed a soft circle of light. Leary ran to meet him. They come soon, Sira said calmly. What will you do, Thomas? I'll try to stop them. I'll tell them the truth. Sira looked at him with quiet strength. Sometimes truth needs more than words. He didn't understand what she meant until she raised her hands. The air around them began to shimmer. A low sound filled the space like distant music. The stones on the ground started to glow, connecting with threads of light. What is this? Thomas asked. Sira said, The gate. Long ago, our ancestors built it to protect our world. It listens to those who carry light without fear. The glowing threads rose higher, forming a pattern in the air. Tomas felt warmth in his chest where the Thalen stone rested in his pocket. It began to shine, answering the light around them. Leary stepped forward. It hears you too. Tomas looked in awe. It's beautiful. Sira nodded. It can show them what we are if they choose to see. He realized she meant to use the gate to communicate, to show peace through light and memory instead of words. At dawn, the human units approached the cliffs, scanning the area. The officers carried pulse tools, ready to defend themselves. Thomas stood in their path. Stop, he said firmly. Don't go closer. They're not enemies. The lead officer hesitated. Move aside, Thomas. Before he could answer, the ground beneath them began to glow. Streams of light rose from the sand, weaving patterns in the air. The officers raised their weapons, but Thomas shouted, Wait! It's not an attack. Leary and Sira stepped forward from the cliffs, their pendants shining. The glow surrounded everyone, human and Thalen alike. Images appeared in the air, scenes of Thalen life, rivers of light, the building of their homes, their songs, their children. The humans lowered their weapons slowly. Thomas felt tears in his eyes. The gate was showing truth, just as Sira had said. When the light faded, silence fell again. The lead officer removed his helmet. His expression had softened. They're alive like us, he said quietly. Thomas nodded. Yes, they always were. That night, both camps rested side by side near the cliffs. No barriers, no weapons drawn. Thomas sat beside Leary, watching the stars. "You did it," she said softly. "No," he replied. "We did it together." Sira joined them, placing her hand on both their shoulders. Two lights met and became one. "The stars will remember this day." Thomas looked toward the sky. For the first time, he believed it. But even as peace settled over the desert, he knew the hardest part was still to come. The decision from the commanders above would soon arrive. Would they accept what they had seen, or would they still fear what they could not control? As the night deepened, Thomas made a silent promise to himself. No matter what came next, he would stand with the Thaylen, because in their quiet strength and in their trust, he had seen what humanity could become. The desert wind carried the soft sound of Thaylen songs, rising like the light of dawn. For now, Orion 9 slept under peace. The first light of dawn stretched across the desert of Orion 9, turning the sands pale gold. Thomas stood on the ridge, looking toward the Thaylen camp nestled at the base of the cliffs. The lanterns from the previous night had dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of the morning sun and the faint shimmer of the Thaylen stones scattered across the ground. Leary was already awake. She ran toward him, her small steps fast and graceful. Her pendant glowed softly and she smiled. "Thomas," she said, "they watch." He followed her gaze and saw several human drones hovering far above the cliffs. They were scanning the area, recording everything. The Corps had sent reinforcements overnight, likely to review the events from yesterday. Thomas's stomach tightened. He knew this morning would test the fragile peace they had created. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I will explain. I promise." Leary nodded and pressed her hand into his, a gesture of trust and encouragement. Thomas took a deep breath and walked toward the center of the camp, where Sira and a few elders stood. Their eyes glimmered with calm wisdom. "They come," Sira said quietly. "Yes," Thomas replied. "And they must understand. I will speak for all of us." Thomas stood tall and raised his voice as the drones drew closer. "I am Thomas Rayner," he said, "engineer of the Human Expansion Corps. I have been living here among the Thaylen for several days. They are peaceful. They are intelligent. And they are not a threat." From the cliffs, Sira and Leary stepped forward. Their pendants glowed brightly, casting soft light across the desert floor. Thomas gestured toward them. "This is Leary and this is her mother Sira, and these are the Thaylen, her people. They live in harmony with this world. They do not take more than they need. They protect the land and each other. I ask you to see them as I do, as friends, not objects of study." A soft hum rose from the Thaylen stones and the air shimmered around them. The drones scanned, but the light seemed to ripple through the air, almost as if the desert itself was alive. Thomas's communicator buzzed suddenly. The voice of Commander Lian came through. "Engineer Rayner, report immediately. This is a secure first contact zone. Are the aliens contained?" Thomas took a steady breath. "Commander, they are not to be contained. They are alive and intelligent. They have families and culture. I will not allow them to be treated as samples or property. I am requesting permission to negotiate peace and understanding." There was silence. Then Lian said, "Rayner, you are stepping beyond protocol. Return immediately or face disciplinary action." "I cannot," Thomas replied firmly. "I am human, yes, but I am also a guest in their world. I will not betray that trust." He turned his attention back to the Thaylen. Sira stepped closer to him and whispered, "You are brave. Speak truth. Let the light guide them." Thomas nodded. He held the Thaylen stone given to him yesterday. Its warmth spread through his hand and he felt calm courage flow into him. He raised it high. The Thaylen stones around the camp pulsed in rhythm, sending gentle beams of light toward the sky. The human drones hovered in place, scanning. Slowly, a voice came from one of the officers, transmitted through a speaker. "We see the lights. What are they showing?" Thomas held his voice steady. "They are showing life. They are showing families, culture, songs, and care. They are alive and thinking beings, not objects. You see them as people when you watch the light." From the cliffs, Leary stepped forward. She touched her pendant and the glow intensified. Images appeared in the air, soft and clear. Human eyes could see scenes of Thaylen life. Children learning, elders guiding, rivers of crystal water flowing through the cliffs and songs rising like ribbons of color. The officers lowered their scanners slowly, silent and awed. Thomas watched the faces behind the helmets. For the first time, he saw curiosity instead of fear. One officer finally said, "They are like us. They live and think and care." "Yes," Tomas said, "and they trust me. They will trust you too if you are patient." The next few hours were tense but peaceful. Tomas guided the humans to understand the Thaylen customs. He explained the glowing stones, the significance of the songs, and the connection between the Thaylen and the land. Sira demonstrated by showing how to arrange stones and hum, creating soft light that moved gently with their gestures. Slowly, understanding began to grow. The humans started to set aside the scanners and weapons, replacing them with notebooks and open hands. One officer even took a small Thaylen stone into his hand and felt the warmth and energy within it. By evening, both humans and Thaylen sat together near the cliffs. They shared a simple meal. Tomas served fruits and water to the Thaylen, and they offered the humans a sweet drink made from desert herbs. The air was filled with quiet conversation, gestures, and soft laughter. Leary sat beside Tomas. She leaned against him and whispered, "Safe now?" "Yes," Tomas said softly. "They see us now. They understand." Sira joined them, placing her hand on both their shoulders. "The trust you have built will last if you nurture it," she said. Human and Thaylen can walk together now. The night deepened. The twin moons rose over the cliffs, reflecting light onto the desert. Tomas looked at the Thaylen children playing with floating lanterns and at the human officers watching in awe. He realized that something remarkable had happened. A single act of kindness and saving Leary had bridged two worlds. Hours later, Tomas stood with Sira near the edge of the cliff. The stars sparkled above like tiny flames. "You will return to your people soon," Sira said softly. "Will you tell them what you have seen?" "I will," Tomas replied. "I want them to know the truth. That life is alive in ways we can't always measure. That understanding is stronger than fear." Sira smiled. "Then the light will spread. Humanity will remember this day." The next morning, Tomas prepared to leave with the human team. Leary ran to him and held his hand tightly. "Come back," she said softly. "I will," Tomas promised. "You have my word." Sira stepped forward. She placed her hands over both their heads and whispered words in her language. The translator device conveyed them in English. "May your hearts remain open. May your paths carry trust and light. Remember Orion 9, for it remembers you." Tomas felt warmth spread through his chest. He hugged both Sira and Leary carefully, then stepped toward the ship. The humans watched quietly. Their expressions changed. For many, this was not just a mission anymore. It was a lesson. As the ship rose above the cliffs, Tomas looked down at the Thaylen camp. The lights of the lanterns shimmered faintly against the rising sun. Leary waved at him, her pendant glowing brightly. He waved back, feeling a quiet pride and hope. On the way back to the orbiting station, Tomas recorded his report. But instead of writing about minerals or coordinates, he wrote about people. He described the Thaylen, their songs, their lights, their care for each other and the land. He wrote about trust, kindness, and the first moments when humans and Thaylen truly saw each other as equals. When the report was sent, Tomas watched the stars outside the window. He felt a quiet certainty. Humanity had reached far, but true growth came from understanding. From respecting life that was not theirs. From choosing kindness over fear. In the months that followed, communications between humans and Thaylen grew. Exchange missions were established not for study or control, but for learning. Tomas visited Orion 9 often, teaching humans the ways of the Thaylen and learning himself. Leary and Tomas became close friends. She would sometimes guide him to secret places in the cliffs, showing him glowing rivers and hidden groves filled with floating light stones. Tomas taught her about human tools, engineering, and the stars as seen from other worlds. Sira watched them with quiet pride. "You two are the bridge," she said once. "The path between our worlds depends on trust and light." And so, on Orion 9, under twin moons and endless stars, humans and Thaylen shared knowledge, laughter, and hope. A single act of compassion, saving Leary, had shown that one choice could change the course of worlds. Tomas looked at the horizon each day, feeling the warmth of the desert sun and the glow of Thaylen stones in his pocket. He knew that humanity could be more than explorers or conquerors. They could be friends, protectors, and keepers of trust. And in the quiet moments, when Leary sang and the lanterns floated into the sky, Tomas understood something simple and powerful. The universe had many voices, but the brightest were those that spoke through light, kindness, and courage. He smiled, feeling the pulse of life around him. Humanity had found a way to stand not through fear or force but through understanding, and somewhere across the stars that message would carry forward. We are here. We are aware. We choose trust. Orion 9 was no longer just a desert. It was a home of connection, proof that when humans reached out with heart and courage, they could be heroes not through weapons but through care. And for Thomas, Leary, and the Thalen, the future glowed as brightly as the stones in the cliffs, soft yet eternal. The twin moons rose high, and the desert slept under the soft light of friendship.